The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Welcome to Politically Speaking Election Edition. I'm David Shearman. Over the next week or so, I will be interviewing the candidates for the riding of Bruce Grey, Owen Sound here, and you'll get to meet them. We'll be spending about half an hour with each candidate, and our first candidate is Alex Ruff. Alex is running for the Conservative Party of Canada, and he is also the incumbent MP. Alex, welcome. Good to see you again.
Great seeing you, David. Too bad we can't be doing this in person, but obviously the measures are still in place, but it's always great to talk to you and get the message out to the constituents of Bruce Grey, Owen Sound. Absolutely, Alex. Absolutely.
Now, you've had 2 years as representative representing this electoral district, and it's been an interesting 2 years to be sure. You started as a new MP, and I remember our very first interview when you were probably a little awed by what you had just jumped into. But at the same time, you've had 2 years, 2 years in the House. And what would be the accomplishment that you're most proud of in your term as MP?
Great question, David. I don't know if there's one specific thing that I'm most proud of. There's a number of issues I've obviously stood up right from the very first question when I asked, on behalf of the beef farmers and our agricultural industry here across the riding about BSE status and why that was delayed and we missed that by a year, to standing up for, our firearms owners, standing up for getting high-speed internet. Are disabled or those visually impaired, getting improvements done to the Canadian Emergency Business Account. But I guess to answer your question pointedly, I think the most thing I'm proud of is my team, in particular the great staff that I've had working in the constituency office, has been really good at trying to get back to people as quickly as possible and really trying to develop that reputation that myself and my team are somebody that is there to listen primarily to all the constituents of Bruce Grey, Owen Sound, regardless if they voted for me in the last election or not, or even going forward. I think my job, or any elected official, is primarily there to listen to the constituents, take that feedback, and then act on it whenever we can.
You've done a lot of roles in the House of Commons, and right now you're in the Whip's office, and that's been I'm sure a very interesting experience. But you've moved around a little bit too, so you've had a fair bit of exposure to the various roles of an MP, have you not?
No, absolutely. I started out as a standing member on the Veterans Affairs Committee, and obviously, worked hard there to try to get the Veterans Affairs Department to get a plan out to address the backlog as a primary issue, because there's over, the 40,000 different files backlog there. So that was one of the final things that we did before the pandemic broke, to put that pressure on the department. And so I was able to get some pointed questions in there and sort of leverage that understanding with the former deputy minister. He's now retired, General Natinchuk, to remind him that, hey, it's great to talk a plan. We need it in writing. We need some commitments. But then I've had the good fortune to be a substitute on Defense Committee. Obviously, a lot of stuff going on there that I have firsthand knowledge with, or background exposure to, sitting in on the Ag Committee. And then obviously the exposure you get at being one of the 4 House officers that each federal party has within the House of Commons. So you get exposed to the inner proceedings, how things work in the House and key things, and it forces you to try to be up to speed on every file, every bill. You can't become experts on everything. I mean, that's one of the things everybody's warned of, is don't try to become an expert on everything. You need to pick those key issues that primarily resonate with the constituents in your respective ridings, or where you have some background or experience in. So it's been a great learning opportunity. And I mean, I've always been a person that likes to challenge myself and push myself to my own limits and find out where those are. And so I've enjoyed it immensely, and I'm looking forward hopefully if I can earn that privilege again to continue to represent our great riding.
Now, you had some involvement with the recent evacuation from Afghanistan, did you not?
Yeah, I mean, not directly per se, other than lots of people reaching out, former colleagues, Afghans, Afghan Canadians, and just even cross-party stuff. I've had MPs from the Liberal Party phone me and ask me what they could do, what could be better. Because to be frank, there are a lot of bureaucracy and not a lot of quick action. And to be somewhat critical, and I have been critical of the approach that was taken by the current government. There was warnings coming months ago that this was going to be quite the possibility of the Taliban taking control again. Maybe not as quickly, a lot of people thought, but at the same time, there's been warnings for a long time. In fact, I was shocked to watch an interview that the current Minister of National Defense had done, which brought up the fact that he had been briefed by CSIS 2 years ago that as soon as the withdrawal of the U.S. troops occurred, that the Taliban, in all likelihood, would sweep back into power. So I put a statement out July 9th. I wrote an article in the Toronto Sun, I think July 22nd or something like that, saying then they had 2 weeks to really take action. And unfortunately, it was almost a month after my initial sort of say, hey, you need to act on this immediately if you want to get as many people out as possible. And, so there was a little bit of frustration, and there's still a lot of anger, a lot of disappointment, a lot of frustration, especially among the Afghan veteran community. And ultimately, this is something that should have never been, isn't a partisan issue. This isn't about any political party. This is about doing the right thing by these Afghans that helped us and stood up for us. And I mean, it was unfortunately the timing with, the prime minister calling an election for whatever reason. We're still trying to figure that one out. I think that's about 70% of Canadians don't understand why an election was called, other than I think the desire for the prime minister to try to regain his majority government. And he did it right at the start, or really when things started escalating in Afghanistan at the height of an international humanitarian aid crisis. And that's why myself and some of my colleagues even called for Minister Garneau, Sage, and Menachino to stop campaigning for a while, to give that necessary leadership and direction to their respective departments to ensure that this would happen as quickly as possible. And now, as you can see, the U.S. troops have completely pulled out of Afghanistan, and now they're still, I think the latest reports that have even come out of the government, there's still upwards of 1,300 Afghan Canadians and others that are sort of stuck there and trying to figure out how to get out of Afghanistan and get to safety.
The other thing that I think that has dominated the agenda, at least in for almost every one of us, has been, of course, COVID. And each of the parties has their own particular way of looking at the recovery, because we're now into wave 4, and there have been changes. But we're all looking towards that day when we'll get back to some semblance of normal. What is your party saying about an economic recovery in COVID?
Well, that's what we've been saying for months now. Really, we've released our 5-point plan a number of months ago, which focuses on recovering those million jobs lost during the pandemic, sorting out and reinvigorating the anti-corruption laws that exist there so that politicians aren't benefiting, or friends of insiders to political parties or the government in this case, during this pandemic, to make it good. Revitalizing our commitment to the healthcare system right across Canada. We've announced now that we'll double the current Liberal transfers to the provinces, increase from 3% annually to 6% annually, including very much a focus on mental health, and working with the provinces there to and not-for-profits and other organizations, because the pandemic has obviously made mental health underlying the struggles that Canadians are having, and just made it worse for them. Being prepared for a future pandemic, building that critical infrastructure, whether it's domestic vaccine manufacturing or other critical elements to being prepared, PPE production, et cetera, so that we're prepared for a future pandemic. And then ultimately getting the balance or the budget back under balance within the next decade, because right now, I mean, I'm literally almost petrified for my daughter, who's 8 years old now, and the amount of debt. We're at $1.2 trillion, I believe, and going forward, there's been the national debt has doubled in the last 2 years alone under the current government, and I think we need to get that under control. So, as well, day one and day two, I guess technically, after the writ was dropped, our party released for the first time, I think, in the history of Canada, the full election platform right off the get-go. And as I've mentioned before, Aaron O'Toole, our leader, is a policy guy. He's not afraid of putting pen to paper, putting everything he stands for on paper and putting it out there. 160-page document out there that in detail. It's not something just like empty words. There's actually details and a specific plan, and everything that I've seen from the other parties even to date yet, a lot of it's just rehashes for the current government of previous election promises, and there's not a lot of details in what they've actually put forward. So that's what we're representing, and it's really all about getting all sectors of the Canadian economy on track and moving forward again, because that's what we're going to need to get us out of this and moving forward and getting people back to work.
One of the things that I think that is, I won't say been uncovered, because some have been saying this for a long time, but I think we're more aware of, is that there are barriers to employment that exist in this country. And I'm thinking of things like childcare and a livable wage. Does your party have any comment on those two issues?
Well, we're all about, people being paid well for the jobs they do, and nobody's questioning that. Obviously, provinces, for the most part, control minimum wage for the respective provinces, because every province is slightly different. The Liberals have put a childcare program out. The problem with that program, from my understanding, is it's going to have sort of pick winners and losers, and it's a system that's not going to work. And in particular, I believe in rural Canada very well. It might work here in Owen Sound, but I don't think it's going to work in Tara or Paisley or some of our smaller communities. So what we've put forward is an increase to the tax credit for that would, I think, put it up to 75% here. I can verify here in a second. And it's going to allow families to choose and be able to make childcare affordable for them so that they can move forward and have those options available to them.
Certainly, that's both of those issues, a fair wage and childcare, are certainly conversation pieces in a lot of parts of this country. And I know that here in Grey Bruce, that's both of them are interesting and necessary issues. But curiously, we have better than employment levels than we've had prior to the COVID pandemic. So we're very fortunate in that way. But I wanted to move on to another area, kind of related, because it's an economic issue, and that is the question of climate change. We've been put on notice that climate change is a serious issue, and we're running out of time. We've got to make changes now. What does your party say that they'll do about climate change?
Well, David, we released our plan back in April, and it was verified by Navius, an independent, nonpartisan climate modeler that does most of the modeling for the federal government and the provinces. And they've stated clearly that our plan is just as effective as the current Liberal plan for reducing greenhouse gas emissions across this country without the same negative impact. We recognize, and there's been a bit of a shift from traditionally, and then this is some of the criticisms I think we faced in the last federal election, that our plan wasn't credible. But now it's been determined that it is credible. Aaron O'Toole's been crystal clear that we need to take this. We've taken a bit of criticism, to be frank, on the fact that we've now adopted a carbon pricing scheme. But unlike the current Liberal plan, which is a tax that goes to the government coffers, this is money that all Canadians will retain. And I shouldn't say all Canadians, any province that chooses to use it. Because remember, there's really only 4 provinces right now that are sort of being penalized by the Liberal carbon tax. And some of them, Saskatchewan, even a couple months ago, said, all right, we're going to introduce our own measures. And the current government said, no, you can't do that yet. You're not allowed to do your own thing. We're taxing you right now. And so it's that sort of hypocrisy that I find, frustrating. And as well, to be frank, the current Liberal plan hasn't been working ever since they've been elected. Greenhouse gas emissions in this country have gone up every year. So we're trying to put a real pragmatic, realistic plan that's going to, at the same time, not impact our economy. And it's been verified, as I said. So I encourage all Canadians to get out there. I've been sharing that all constituents, but I've been sharing it across the riding here for months now, and encouraging feedback. And some of it's been critical, but for the most part, a lot of the concern has lessened from previously, when I was first elected and a couple of years ago, because people recognize that, hey, we have a legitimate plan that's on the table, and it's credible, and it'll work there without having that negative impact on the economy.
Is there an international component to the party's plan? Because it's fine for us to act on our own, but unless we're acting in concert with other nations, we're pretty much, there's not much we can do.
Well, I don't disagree with you there. And I think one of the key aspects is Canada's already, leading in industrial sort of in green innovation. We're fortunate to have here in Owen Sound, as you know, Hydrogen Optimized, a leading company in green hydrogen that fortunately, I was not privileged, I guess, honored to be able to, or happy that when I reached out to the current government and some of the federal ministers and said, hey, here's a program, a local company that is leading Canadian innovation. And I just, made sure that when they had filed their application to the federal government to get some grant support in order to take their technology and get it to that next stage, that the government listened. And they actually funded that, I think, to the tune of over $3.5 million that they received from federal funding to help lead this way. And that's just one example across the country. We are, as I said, leaders. Canada is leaders in environmental, sustainable, green technology that we should be getting out there. And I think that's the greatest way to help reduce global emissions, because Canada is responsible for 1.6% of the greenhouse gas emissions. China alone is responsible for over 50% now. So if we can't, I think that's the key thing. If we fundamentally want to change and make an impact on the global stage, we need to continue to get that technology out there, make it accessible across the markets, and by doing that, it'll actually make a difference in combating the ongoing climate crisis.
Well, let's shift things just a little bit, although it's obviously related to COVID. We've had a lot of public health measures that have been introduced in Canada over the last 2 years, through 18 months, I guess, through COVID. Immunization, vaccination certificates, which are both a federal and provincial responsibility. What's your party's position on the various public health measures that we've had to experience over the last 18 months?
So obviously we've been encouraging, I've personally been encouraging all Canadians, all constituents to get vaccinated, but ultimately this is a personal health choice. But vaccines have proven to be one of the most effective tools to combat COVID. And so that's what we're continue to encourage. In fact, what I frequently do is I've pulled out all 3 of my immunization books, because I've been inoculated likely more than most 10 constituents because of my 25 years in the military. And so I'm encouraging and doing everything I can. I've even volunteered at some of at the local Grey Bruce drop-in clinics to help get people vaccinated. But ultimately, as I said, it's a personal health choice on the way Canadians want to go forward. That is their choice. And so that's what we've been that's our line, which is actually directly in line with what the government's telling us. Trudeau's been saying one thing, but ultimately he made that announcement for the federally regulated sectors that, hey, it's mandatory. However, the direction that came out from the Treasury Board Secretariat that manages all federally employed federal employees stated, 2 days afterwards that, all right, it is mandated. However, if you choose not to get it for medical reasons, personal reasons, etc., then there's other measures that can be done, like rapid testing, proof of a negative test, et cetera, to do this. So I find, again, it's a little hypocritical of what the current government and the Prime Minister has been stating, because his plan is actually identical to what Aaron's been saying from the day one in our party, that, ultimately we want everybody to get it. However, there's other tools to be available, and it's ultimately a personal health choice. When it comes to the certification question, well, that's really from a federal standpoint, only demonstrating or proving that for foreign nationals coming into Canada if they want to, not avoid the quarantine measures. And it's up to other countries to determine what they want as well. And it's up to the provinces. And as we saw yesterday, it looks like the Ontario is making a decision to move forward with some sort of thing. But that's provincial jurisdiction. That's not federal jurisdiction.
Okay. One of the characteristics so far of this election campaign, although it has not been as strong, well, yes, I guess it has been. We've had a couple of incidents here in Grey Bruce, is Islamophobia, hate crimes, and other acts of let's say, other acts are on the rise. People of certain national groups are saying we're seeing a lot more people picking on us, bullying, language that is completely inappropriate. Well, what's your party say about? I should also add that several of the incidents actually happened to the leader of the NDP. He has been confronted by people making inappropriate remarks. What's your party's response to these incidents, and what have you got in your platform to move us forward to respond to some of these, let's call them what they are, hate crimes?
So absolutely. I mean, the criminal code has a whole section of it, that states that these are criminal acts and therefore should be appropriately dealt with by law enforcement. Aaron O'Toole was very quick to get out and condemn any of the actions that have been taken, in particular those against the Prime Minister, and I'm sure Mr. Singh too, although I can't remember seeing that specific one. As you know, I've put out my own statements here a couple times over the last 2 years when there's been anything local condemning the act. I believe in freedom of expression, but you should never be promoting hatred or violence on others. And ultimately, as I've said so many times, I've been around the globe, we're all human beings. There is no difference as far as I'm concerned, just based on where you were born or your religious beliefs, etc. We're all just people, and we should just treat everybody and respect everybody like we want to be treated and respected ourselves. Within our platform specifically, we do address online hate crime and absolutely, especially that's occurring on social media. And as I mentioned before, there's existing criminal law protections against the publishing of hate speech. And we need to further, support our law enforcement and make sure that they're going forward and dealing with this in appropriate ways and giving them the tools to do that versus, creating a new, as the current government has proposed in a couple of their bills, a new online regulator, another officer or another ministry or something to deal with this. Ultimately, we just need to enable our law enforcement and deal with it through the criminal codes and the laws that already exist in this country.
Speaking of online, obviously the whole high-speed internet issue has been one that you've been speaking to. You and I have spoken to during your term in office. But what does your party say about internet connectivity, rural internet connectivity specifically? Is there a section of the platform that deals with that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a full section that talks about that. We're going to move and get, I believe, 95% of Canadians with their high-speed internet by 2025 or 2026. I'm pretty sure it's 2025. I'd have to go check the platform exactly. But at the same time, dedicating a pile of the infrastructure funding, the national infrastructure funding program, that it has to get invested into rural areas across this country, and in particular, the digital side of the house, and pushing forward on that. And as well, we talk in our platform about the need to make sure that the big telecoms aren't the only ones benefiting from this, holding them to account, making sure that they're being competitive and not forcing out others. So there's a bunch of things in the plan that strictly focus on this, because this is something that, as we proposed some solutions that would have got some fundamental progress made within 18 months. I've been a big advocator of the SWIFT program locally, which is a great opportunity where it saw funding coming from the federal, provincial, municipal levels and private sector, and trying to get it out there. And I've even asked some questions. Unfortunately, I'm not going to get all the answers back that I'd submitted through written questions before we had the summer recess, because obviously with the dissolution of Parliament, all those questions just get thrown in the garbage. But if we have the privilege of forming government, I will get answers to those very quickly, because I think they need to be answered. And if not, they'll be resubmitted if I'm still in opposition after September 20th, and if the people give me the privilege of getting reelected and to represent them here.
One last question. So we've got about 3 minutes left, but I think I'd be remiss if I didn't raise it. The discoveries of bodies on sites of Indian residential schools over the last few months has prompted a great deal of grief and reflection in this country. What's your party planning to do to work towards Indigenous reconciliation?
So we have a number there. Again, there's a whole chunk in there about dealing with reconciliation and the importance of it. We called right from day one when this came out to, I believe it's out of the Truth and Reconciliation action plan, I think 71 through 76, to really focus on that and get them funded and moving forward, and calling on the government to do this at the time, even before, and we're still committed to doing that. As you know, I personally stood up in the House of Commons. I questioned the Liberal minister on some of this stuff. I talked about the late Chief Wilmer Najawan from and World War II vet, and quoted from his book, which talks about the tragedy and suffering that he had at the Spanish residential school. So he was able to get over his, as he called it, his war demons from the Second World War, but those horrific experience that he had at the Spanish residential school was never he never got over that before he passed away. And in particular, and I've mentioned this and I've communicated this with a lot of the local school kids. I had so many kids that reached out to me. I personally replied back to every student that wrote to me in the last few months. But with these, hundreds of unmarked graves that were found, unfortunately, I think we're going to find more, and we've been encouraging the funding there to go forward to help get all these graves identified, so that the families can have closure. Because reading from some of the reports from the turn of the century, that 50% of the students that were in attendance at these schools were dying from things like tuberculosis and other diseases. And so there's a lot more of them, unfortunately, that will be found. And it's something that I think we need to take action on. But more importantly, we need to take concrete action as well to get clean water. We saw the government promise this from 2015, and they were going to deliver it by March of this year, and it still wasn't done. So there's lots of concrete examples that we're pushing for to make this happen in a very quick, much quicker and efficient manner.
Well, Alex, we're almost out of time, but I want to thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. Alex Ruff, the candidate for the Conservative Party of Canada and the incumbent MP from Bruce Grey Owen Sound. Always a pleasure to talk to you. We'll probably talk on election night, we hope, at least as we talk to all our candidates. So best wishes to you, and we'll probably cross paths again.
Thanks, David.
All right. All the best. And thank you, friends, for being a part of Politically Speaking Election Edition. I'm David Shearman. We'll talk again.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Treaty in Cree is Naskomitoin, an oral agreement. And our agreements were always spoken. For George Spence, the core of treaty was Wichihioin, to help one another.
And so we, the commissioners,
He was there for the making of Treaty 9, where the Cree were told,
we will honor this agreement together for as long as the sun shines and the waters flow.
the Cree made their mark because they were assured that the land would be shared, and they would always be able to harvest what they needed. George Spence was my great-grandfather. In his life, he saw many promises of the treaty go unfulfilled.
Treaties were essential to the creation of Canada. First Nations still fight for the agreements to be honored.
The opinions expressed in the following programs are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
Hi, and welcome to Politically Speaking Election Edition. I'm David Shearman. We will be interviewing all of the candidates in Bruce Grey Owen Sound for election in the 2021 federal election. And today my guest is Reima Kaikkonen. Reima is an independent candidate. That means he has no party affiliation. And we'll get to meet him in just a moment. Reima, welcome. Good to have you here with us.
Thank you, thank you. Especially after all the commotion when we got in. Thank you for the patience.
You're discovering that rural internet in Grey Bruce can be very, very interesting, if nothing else.
Yes, it is. Thank goodness it's the summertime.
That is true. That is true.
So,
let me ask a couple of questions. You have no party affiliation. You are what is considered an independent candidate. What was the reason you decided to run in this election?
Well, because I'm disappointed, deeply disappointed of current government. I have children, grandchildren, 17 grandchildren, 6 children, and I feel for them because things are not opportune way for especially young generation. And I think we can do much better. And I can see that we are kind of disconnected with the foundations this whole country was founded on, which was basically Christian values. Honoring hard work and honest day's work for honest day's pay. And letting loose the private industry to create jobs and services and the farmers to farm as they best see, and also the Constitution was a deep disappointment that it is now not being followed and not honored as the highest law in this country. And that's one of my reasons is that since that is not done, it seems like dependent candidates who are, I call them dependent because they are party dependent. I call myself Jesus dependent, who is firmly about the freedoms of man to choose their way in this world, as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else.
Can you say more about how the Constitution hasn't worked?
Our curtailment of our rights or movement, our passport. Are we still on?
Oh, yes.
Yes, okay. Our passport ideas to put into the society, vaccination passport, completely against the constitutional laws. No, I think we can do better. And as an independent, or rather Jesus dependent, I actually just want to learn what my constituents are about. And when I represent them, I can, I believe, do it very accurately as they wish me to do and say and vote in the parliament. We have recent examples that if you vote as your constituents desire, you can get actually fired from your party.
Say more about that.
Well, as you know, we have 4 good men from the major party that many people consider very good men, principled men. What's his name? David Sloan, for one, had to go and leave the party because his conscious efforts were not rewarded by the party, but probably would be by the constituents.
Right. So you're referring to the Canadian, the Conservative Party of Canada's Derek Sloan, who had to leave, who was removed from caucus.
Yeah, actually, typically.
By the leader. Sure. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. So that inspires me that independent can actually just listen what people are saying. And this predominantly is a Christian and a God-honoring region. Many farmers, small businessmen. There's something about living in the midst of the nature. Like a nature speaks of the presence of God. And that sends the message to the hearts of men in this area especially, that I have rubbed shoulders with so many of my constituents in this area for 45 years as I lived here, that I believe I know what is their desire, what our government should be about.
I'm looking at your... Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Which is basically, we should start with restoring principles of godliness in our government. And I'm basically, our basic format is a pro-life, pro-family, pro-freedom and opportunity in this country.
What would that look like when you say pro-faith, pro-life, pro-family, pro-freedom? What would that look like? What kind of policies would you want to bring in that, or work for, that would reflect that?
Well, I would go first of all to the what's hindering the nation right now is, for example, the carbon tax. It would be one of those things that right now it's the horrible timing to bring on another tax. I hear that from small businessmen, truckers especially are frustrated that their livelihoods are now taxed, as they were not expected to actually in their contracts to pass it on to their customers. It's a very difficult situation. And I believe our biggest need for climate change right now is a spiritual climate change, which our leader, Lord Jesus, which is the ultimate leader of the whole universe, is saying that love the Lord and love your fellow man as yourself. And that is a basic constitution for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe it's open to all mankind. Sorry.
What about those who, for example, don't follow the Christian tenets that you're talking about? How would you relate?
God loves them, we love them, and that they have complete freedom to choose what they believe in. I'm not railroading anything. I just want to show what works for me and works for millions of people all around the world. If you take, for example, nations that inherently have been Christian-based, Judeo-Christian values, they're the nations that now the most of the world flock to. Almost no exception. So that speaks for itself. The evidence is that the Christian Judeo values is the foundation for the societies that make sense, including ours. This is an amazing place. If you travel around the world, many come to this country and put their hands and say, thank you, Jesus, that I'm back home. But it's not easy street to maintain the country like this. There's a huge challenges, and now we are facing those challenges. And I don't believe it's actually the flesh and blood that we are up against. According to the Bible, we are up against the principalities of darkness. No, not people, but that principality of darkness can direct people's hearts to away from the foundations that work.
When you speak to you about in your platform about being pro-life, what does that mean? Tell us about what being pro-life is.
Well, pro-life is that there's a right to life given by God, already to the unborn baby, even fetus, and all the way to when people are elderly and about to expire. The right to life is a basic right and freedom then to do with your life as you are led by your own ideas. And to help us, the Lord graciously gave us his ideas that he freely calls us to follow or completely ignore. That is our decision, and that is inherently gift to mankind that makes us different from animals, that we have this amazing gift of true choice.
So that to be pro-life would be to be able to make choices which reflect life.
Indeed, yes. Reflect life in all the fronts. Freedom to choose your profession, to education, and you know, this country is so encouraging to come to. When I did come to this country, it was that freedom to be who you are called to be was engaging. It's like, it's contagious. When I was here with my one knapsack and 2 luggages, scared and almost shaking in my feet. First time I was in a city with street lights. I came from Finland. But what was brought to me was that freedom to be who you want to be. That is unique in the world, and it's usually in the Christian countries that you experience that.
Okay.
So we want to cherish that and actually really like build upon it. The nations can be built upon those basic values of loving the Lord, because that's the firm base. And then love your fellow man as yourself. Like this summarizes, according to Jesus, all the law and the prophets. In other words, over 1,000 pages of Bible is summarized by love the Lord and love your fellow man. That's a beautiful gift.
You use the phrase pro-family in your platform. What does that mean?
Well, the basic family is man and woman that have a potential of having children, and that's a foundation for the nation. So that is a pro-family. I'm pro-family in a somewhat narrowed sense, because God created us, Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. And that is a foundation that, you know, such nation can be built. There's no, right now the industrialized nations are actually starting to lack of citizens. This country probably would shrink if we wouldn't have the immigration. And my country where I came from, and the whole Europe in huge part, actually you could calculate already when they would be done. Because the progress is downward in the population growth in many other countries. And I think we cannot afford that. We need to produce children in this country, taxpayers. We need taxpayers the worst way right now.
Well, what is your position on immigration? I mean, you yourself are an immigrant.
It's a wonderful thing that people all around the world can dream of starting their lives all over and come to the place like Canada. I'm all for it. But when they do come, like myself, I was interviewed and asked what I do for a living and so on. I was car mechanic, and they passed the judgment if I was a beneficial to Canada. And then they concluded that let's give him a chance. And that was a wonderful gift to me that I was able to come here. But I did dig into the work. I've never been on any kind of a government handout. But anyway, there's a time for that. But I didn't even know about the option. For a long time, I didn't understand the language as well. And so I just focused on what was ahead of me, like working and trying to pay my bills. And emigration is good. I'm sure we should continue on that. And of course, there's exceptions. Like right now, we have Afghanistan, that those people are very much in need, and horror is taking place out there. So I certainly have compassion for them, and we should reach out to them and offer them place in Canada. But on the whole, I think we should be mindful, is the immigrants we are bringing in, are they, is there a good chance that they are on the answer side for our society rather than on the problem side? When I came to this country, that's exactly what they wanted to do with me. They wanted to make sure I'm a rather asset than liability. Simple as that. We should go back to that thought.
Okay, you talk about also being pro-freedom. What's that mean?
Pro-freedom starts that our country has a constitution. And we have a constitution. The trouble is that we don't seem to be paying attention to it. So that's a basis for freedom. That's the free right to life, and we have right to determine our ways to live, professions, and pursue the lifestyle that fills our heart with the thanksgiving and joy.
Mm-hmm.
And the Constitution it's an amazing gift, actually. I remember Alan Greenspan, the Federal Central Bank maestro, they called him. He was asked once, what is the greatest asset that the United States have? And he said, simply, without much even thinking, it is our Constitution that sets every man free to seek their lives and their happiness without interference from other men. And this same is our privilege, to have the Constitution like that, and we should adhere to it, I'd say at any cost. Because soon as we start deviating from it, however good excuses, there's no limit then. Where does it stop? And inherently, I believe, when people are given opportunity, people do the right thing. So we could actually trust people to do the right thing when given opportunity. It's amazing what happens when you trust someone and they know it, people respond to it.
Is that what you mean in your platform by being pro-opportunity?
Pro-opportunity is a pro-opportunity to, indeed, it's part of their freedom, but opportunity that government should cultivate our lawmaking, cultivate the environment where the starting businesses would be easier and actually very much invited and celebrated by government, and not hindered with the red tape. So I would certainly make moves or try to reduce the red tape. I hear that all over from my constituents, small and medium-sized businessmen, tired of struggling with many of the regulations that hinder. One example is the abattoirs. Abattoirs in this area, whoever is still around, they are all booked. Actually, I just bought myself a cow from the abattoir who says, on the farmer actually, but the abattoir says, takes 6 months when I can actually get it done. So that's one of the typical examples where the regulation has just gone too far to interfere with business. So much so that hardly anybody wants to be abattoir anymore. It's becoming a big business. So I would like to cultivate that opportunity to start businesses and run them and actually make the tax environment for them as good as possible. because that's what the country needs. The small business and medium-sized business are primary employers in this country. And for example, right now here, I hear there's businesses, but they don't have enough people to take part to serve in the trenches of the business. It's like a huge problem right now. And that's probably part of that legislation that right now has actually interfered with the inspiration to get out there and work somewhere and make money and dream big in this country. It's somehow stifled right now with the artificial offers of money that I don't think will bring the good results when you continue it too long, which I believe is the case right now.
You refer in your platform to property ownership rights to be entrenched in the Constitution.
Yes,
can you speak to that?
Well, what's the use of owning property and working hard for building your life if somehow there's a way that the government actually could undermine the whole thing? So it's the foundations of the country that people build things and they own things instead of rent things. There's a completely different spirit involved when people own things. This country, predominantly, people own their houses, farms, and it's a part of that equation of successful country. So if those are somehow at threat, it sends a message that it doesn't pay to climb high and low to build your business because somebody can just by the stroke of the pen undermine it.
You talk about making search and seizure by government illegal without obtaining a warrant. Does that come from your personal experience?
Well, not as much personal, but it comes from the Constitution. Mm-hmm. Comes from the Constitution that will not allow that kind of action towards the person. So if we read the Constitution, which we have no time, it's a tremendous document, and it would give a firm counsel to the country as a whole if we would adhere to it.
But you don't think we are?
No. Response to COVID and this situation is not in good spirit. It's not bringing forth the best in the land, but the other way around.
What would you do differently?
Well, I would make sure that nobody has to be forced to do anything against their will. One foundational thing. I would have a government recommendation based on science, what is the best thinking, and we would widely communicate that to the nation. But we would force no one to actually to obey it unless they violate other people's rights.
So you're saying that you would not be in favor of mandatory vaccination then?
No, amen, no.
Reima, I noticed that in your policy you also have a statement that you don't believe the government has the right to censor any citizen from speaking publicly on any policy issue, including in good faith, according to one's conscience. Can you explain a little more about that, please?
Well, would you repeat that? Sorry, I got a little bit.
You said in your policy, in your platform, I do not believe the government has the right to censor any citizen from speaking publicly on any public policy issue, including acting in good faith according to one's conscience. Can you say more about that?
Well, I'm certainly against or restricting opinions of the citizens expressing their happiness or unhappiness against the policies, and I don't think that should be restricted at all. Right now, I feel and I hear just uncountable reports. So Facebooks are being monitored. And the comments that don't seem to be along with the current narrative in our society right now seem to be just like vanishing into thin air. And whoever is behind that is against the constitutional rights for us to express ourselves. Of course, there's cases where, you know, your communication is out of limits when it concerns criminal type of things. So, of course, those things are not promoted and they should be stopped. But the most good faith communications should be free. And that's the foundations of this country, that we do that because we want to communicate. You know, we need to communicate. It's so sweet to actually communicate with people. What do we have if we don't have actually one another and freedom to express our own opinion and share it with the other person? And sometimes we are completely off the mark, but that's the only way to learn. So let's not interfere with the natural process of people desiring to communicate, and however imperfectly we do that, but we should let the people find their way and their truths in this world. And that's part of the adventure of life, that you're seeking the truth and you find it.
What about people who use hate speech to refer to others? I mean, you're an immigrant and you probably have experienced that kind of sentiment perhaps in your lifetime, but we do have people who choose to use hateful speech. Should they be limited?
Well, myself, I have received quite a bit of, certainly one death wish, actually, right when I'm running. Jesus' name somehow activates a very hateful response in some people. And in some backhanded way, I actually think it's an encouragement, because I must be on the right track by attracting vehement hatred against something that is so foundationally needed in our society, which is our freedoms, and our government should respect the freedoms of men, and really our government should be for the people, by the people. If you ask around right now, people don't feel it is that way. We kind of feel now ruled and dominated by some force that is not really bringing and cultivating forth the best in us. And right now we are like up against one another. And I believe that's lack of communicating. Because there's a situation in this world right now that the only way out of it is that people do the right thing, but we need to determine what that right thing is. Question about hateful speech, of course, that should be limited, but trouble is often, how do you determine clearly what is the hateful expression? Somebody could say talking about Jesus is hateful expression. So yes, it's not carte blanche, but within a common sense limits.
Well, Reima, we're almost out of time, and I want to thank you for your conversation and letting us know a bit about your own platform. Reima Kaikkonen is an independent candidate in Bruce Grey Owen Sound, and thank you again, and best wishes in your election run.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And blessings to all listeners too. Bye.
And thank you, friends, for being a part of Politically Speaking Election Edition. I'm David Shearman. We'll talk again.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.